I have said several times that this is not a sermon series, really. It's just kind of a lecture series. And so we will not pray beforehand, but I will say, good morning. It is good to be here today. Welcome to the third installment in this series titled, You Asked for It. I asked the congregation to submit any questions that they would have about anything that they want answered from the pulpit, biblical, theological, church-related. The questions were wonderful, they were fascinating, and they really gave me some really good talking points for this month. So many of the questions fell into broader categories, so I would try to answer as many as I could by placing those into some categories. Week 1 was an exploration of heaven and hell. Week 2 was an exploration in substitutionary atonement. And week 3, where we're at right now, the question is, why do bad things happen to good people? The most questions I got had to do with the afterlife. That was the category that had the most questions. The second most questions was this topic right here. In some form or fashion, why do bad things happen to good people? Now is the time for the disclaimer, and I really hope everyone hears me on this disclaimer. What I am presenting here are models to help us think through established theological categories. Think of them as conversation starters. They are not conclusions, they are not rigid ideas without room for discussion. My hope is that in these presentations, it helps you engage your theological mind. I would love for people to push back on these issues and these ideas. That's what theological exploration is. We throw around huge concepts and ideas and we play with them. And that does not anger God at all. How wonderful it is when we try to go into the deep mystery of God and try to understand what's happening out there and what's happening in here. Therefore, this is not meant to hurt anyone's faith. If you don't like what I am presenting, come talk to me. If you do like what I am presenting, come talk to me. The point is the conversation, the exploration. So here we go. Why do bad things happen? An exploration in theodicy. Theodicy is a branch of theology that simply asks the question, if God is good and God is powerful, then why do terrible things still happen? Sometimes that's couched in the language of why do bad things happen to good people? But I'd like to expand that question just a little bit and simply ask, why do bad things happen at all if God is so good and God is so powerful? The Bible is a book that speaks not with just one voice. It's a collection of stories and poems and rules and laws and teachings and prophecies. And it came from many different people in different languages, in different time periods, in different cultures, and most assuredly with different agendas. The Bible wrestles with this question better than any book that I have read. There are several models within our scripture that helps to try to get to some answer to this question. Most of the models presented in our Bible have huge problems and holes in them, so we keep digging. That's the exploration. But it's interesting to see how different biblical authors answered this question. So let's start with Deuteronomy 28, verse 1 through 2. If you will only obey the Lord your God by diligently observing all his commandments that I am commanding you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth. All these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you if you obey the Lord your God. The passage goes on to list so many blessings like livestock and food and bread and land and money and all of these things. Just obey the commandments of God and good things will happen. Well, what if you don't obey the commandments of God? Continuing on in that very same chapter in Deuteronomy 28:15. But if you will not obey the Lord your God by diligently observing all his commandments and decrees, which I am commanding you today, then all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. It then goes on to list all the curses that will happen if you don't obey. Your livestock will die, your friends will make fun of you, disaster, panic, and frustration shall overcome you. Your TV only gets the all-Hooter channel, whatever. And clearly, Arkansas has not been following the commands of the Lord our God. If you don't obey, bad things will happen. This is the model that makes the most sense. This is what is fair to everyone. If you do good, you get good. If you do bad, you get bad. What is the problem with this model? It rarely works out that way. That's why we are asking the question, why do bad things happen to good people? The biblical authors struggled with this as well because Ecclesiastes 7:15 seems to not like what Deuteronomy is saying here. So here we go, Ecclesiastes 7:15. In my vain life, I have seen everything. There are righteous people who perish in their righteousness, and there are wicked people who prolong their life in their evil doing. Here we have a biblical author directly challenging the author of Deuteronomy. The author here in Ecclesiastes is saying that righteous people perish in their righteousness, and the wicked people are actually doing better because of their evil doing. You might call that a biblical contradiction if you want, if you stay on the surface. That's fine. I mean, maybe if you stay on the surface, it is a contradiction. But I call it a conversation within our Bible, within our text. These biblical authors are batting around ideas and concepts because no one has the entire truth. Therefore, the exploration must go on. And before we launch into other areas where the biblical authors went, and they went much deeper than these things that we've just seen, we might take a look at a very straightforward logic exercise to launch into this next level of conversation. If you're a math person, I want you to think of an XY plane or graph, right? The X is the horizontal and the Y is the vertical. And if that confuses you, I would have told you to come see me because I am the math guru here at Forest Park. But I cannot say that anymore because Rebecca Peterson is now part of our church. And Rebecca Peterson is this calculus teacher savant that would put my math skills to shame. Has her. Lauren's in the 11th grade at her AP calculus class. And I asked her the other day, I go, kid, you haven't asked me one time for help in your AP calculus class. She looked up, she goes, I'm good. Whatever, dude. So, if an XY coordinate plane is God's willingness to prevent bad things, and the vertical line is God's ability to prevent bad things. So, has problems. It has an explanation, but it has problems. Quadrant 1 is God is able to prevent bad things, willing to prevent bad things and able to prevent bad things. The problem with this quadrant is, then why do bad things happen? If you move over to quadrant 2, God is able to prevent bad things, but not willing to prevent bad things. I got to tell you, that's not really a good God for me. That's malevolent. I'm not interested in a God who can, but doesn't. If you move down to quadrant 3, you've got God not able to prevent bad things. Who cares about that God? I don't even think you can call it God if this thing is unwilling and unable. It doesn't matter. Quadrant 4 has God willing to prevent bad things, but not able to prevent bad things. The problem here is the power of God. If God is all-powerful, as we say in our songs and prayers, then that quadrant doesn't work as well either. So you see how this logic exercise, when people start to really question their faith, this logic exercise allows them to go, see, none of these quadrants work, and I walk away. God is so much deeper than some mere XY coordinate plane. Because if it was that easy, we wouldn't be asking these questions. So the exploration continues. We go deeper than some mere grid. Job is an attempt to answer this question. And this attempt is really different than Deuteronomy, and it's different than Ecclesiastes. Job is a righteous man who was wealthy and had all of life's comforts. Satan piques God's interest when Satan said that the only reason that Job is righteous is because you've given him all the good things. He's got all the wonderful things. Of course you think he's righteous. Take those away, and he will curse you to your face. And God said, all right, let's see what happens here. And calamity after calamity after calamity strikes Job. Why do bad things happen? Well, in Job's case, what if it's the result of some cosmic game or some cosmic contest between God and Satan? Because I got to tell you, I don't think the God character comes off very well in this extended parable in the Hebrew Bible, because it's a wonderful parable, but it's a long parable. But if you stay on the surface of this parable, then there isn't much to glean as to why these things are happening. But just below the surface in Job, there is a gem worth exploring. We're going to come back to that after we explore a few more of these models. So the surface model of Job doesn't do well for me because I don't love the God character in that. Genesis 3 has another model that people cling to. Genesis 3, verses 2 through 3. The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden. But God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, nor shall you touch it, or you shall die." There is a model that suggests that bad things happen because Adam and Eve ate this fruit that they weren't supposed to eat. The fall of man has become as used as the source of all the evil things in the world. Harold Kushner, who is famous for writing Why Bad Things Happen to Good People, he had a pretty good treatment, an interesting treatment anyway, on the Garden of Eden. He thinks the Garden of Eden is a liberating story. Basically, humans graduated from simple to complex when we left the garden. We became human when we realized that there was more to life than eating and mating. Eve gave us humanity with all its richness, but with all its pain as well. We need the bad to experience the good. And so according to Kushner, the story would not be read as a punishment for sin. Eve gave us more than just existence. Eve gave us life. Now, there are some holes in that argument as well. I mean, just like any other model that's being presented. If we need bad to understand good, then I get it when the examples are really simple. Like if every day was Christmas morning, then Christmas morning would cease to be special and fun. We need some non-Christmas days to really feel the awesomeness of Christmas morning. It works. It breaks down for me, though, when I'm sitting with the families of loved ones that are gone. There's a great line from Men in Black, the first one. When Tommy Lee Jones was sad, he was looking at the computer screen, he was sad that he couldn't be with the one that he loved, and the one that he loved didn't even know he existed because they did, the red lighty thing. And so he was sitting there watching the screen and didn't know that Will Smith had come up behind him. So Will Smith said something, he quickly punches the screen and it goes blank, and Will Smith's kind of putting it together, and he goes, "Well, you know what they say. It's better to have loved and lost than not have loved at all." And Tommy Lee Jones' terse response was, "Try it." I mean, so it's not as simple as all that. And as I sit with grieving families, it's not okay to go, "Well, this just shows how good the other parts of life are." So it doesn't work for me. Let's go to another one. This was an interesting one too. Romans chapter 8, verse 18. "I consider that the sufferings of the present time are not worth comparing with the glory about to be revealed in us." That's Paul. And I'm going to go on to the next scripture, Revelation 21:4. This is John of Patmos. "He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away." Paul and John of Patmos seem to be saying that God will heal everything and put everything right in the end. I know there's a lot of suffering going on right now, but hang on, because it will be better soon. This model is wildly appealing to me. Let's get through the muck. Let's get through all of this and then head to the promised land or the light at the end of the tunnel or whatever metaphor works for you. In the end, God rights all wrongs. But the problem with this model is there are people that can't get through the muck. There are people that have unbelievable suffering. There are those that have such weight on them that ending their own life is preferable to one more minute of suffering. Just hang on is not helpful when there's nothing to hang on to. Let's move on. Let's do another model. Isaiah 43, chapter 43, verse 2. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. Isaiah is presenting another model of this question. In this model, God is suffering with us. God is walking alongside us and co-suffers with us in our hardships. There's no indication here in Isaiah that God will prevent the floodwaters or the fires or the overwhelming things in life, but God has promised to walk alongside us through these tragedies. I love and very much adhere to this model. But when you start to play around with it, again, every model's got holes. When you start to play around with it, then how we understand the power of God needs to be examined. I get there through the Jesus story. The power of God looks like a cross instead of a throne. Let us move on to a familiar passage. 1 Corinthians 13. This is a fun model as well. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. How many times have we heard that God is love? Vicki read that at the beginning of this service. God is love. Well, love does not insist on its own way. In this model, God is constrained by love, meaning that if God is love, then God cannot act outside of love. And love is not coercive, and love is not manipulative. We watched the Truman Show a few weeks ago at our movie discussion group. It was a great conversation that we had. This movie is about how one man lived a life that was completely manipulated and controlled by the powers that be. There wasn't one thing that happened to Truman that wasn't planned out and manipulated so that Truman would be cared for and protected. It was not love. It wasn't even close. It was gross to watch. There are so many more, really deeper models that we could do this all day long, truly. There's more models that are nuanced and complex than what we've explored today. But I want to leave you with a deeper understanding of Job than the surface presentation that I did earlier. Job loses everything, even his health. And he does not curse God. He loses everything and still doesn't curse God. And he's sitting there on this ash heap, scraping sores because, he's lost everything. He's with a pottery shard and just woe is me. And, his wife comes by and says, just curse God and die already. Now, Mary Frances has said that to me before, but I think she's joking. I think she's kidding. I hope she's kidding. No, come on. Just teasing. Come on. So Job's friends come by and accuse him of wrongdoing because he is suffering and he is still unmoved. And toward the end of the story, his tongue starts to feel a little loose toward the end of the story, and Job complains to God. Doesn't really curse God, but complains to God. Expressed his desire to know why these bad things are happening to him. God doesn't just respond, God explodes with harshness. He starts doing this. Here we go. Job 38, 1 through 5. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up your loins like a man. I will question you and you will declare to me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. And God goes on and on and on like that for 3 chapters, yelling at Job for even questioning these things. And I have always been so turned off by that exchange until I read a beautiful treatment by it by Fred Buckner. Job's friends gave all the reasons why Job is suffering. And it's really bad theology. His friends are all talking to him. But God yells for 3 chapters and never gives an explanation. God, in the 3-chapter rant, says that explaining why bad things happen to you would be like explaining Einstein's theory of relativity to a grasshopper. Basically, you wouldn't and couldn't understand even the basic concepts that I could share with you. And that seems like a cop-out. That seems like we can't understand, so let's just move on. But let's say that God did explain everything and explain why bad things are happening. Does it even matter? I mean, again, it seems like a cop-out, but if you got the explanation as to why your husband or your wife or your son or your daughter or your brother or sister died, would it help you at all? There's still an empty chair at the dinner table. If you understood why the tornado came and took all those lives needlessly and ruined the entire town, the lives would still be lost and the town would still be ruined. Basically, if we had this answer, it's not going to matter one bit. And that's hard to swallow, but it is so accurate. And again, this is what I know. After seeing all these models and engaging my theological mind until it hurts, this is what I know. God is love. God is with us in every single circumstance. God suffers with us. To be human is to suffer, but we get a divine companion along the way. So thank you for indulging me in this time here. It's time for lunch where we can discuss these things or none of them. I don't care. But the point is the conversation. I love talking with these things and going deep with all of you. Either way, we are not alone in our suffering. Thank you.